the room.
I feel very honored to be here amongst all these international guests and colleagues. I won't be presenting so much upon modernism as such, because my practice has more to deal with identity, people, subjectivity. Well, my name is Hugo Herrera Tobon, and I am a curator and designer based in the Netherlands. I do not like very much the terms curator or designer. I would rather call myself a maker, because I'm not into preserving things like curators supposedly are. And as a designer, also my practice is not so conventional. I don't work only for industries, but I also like to think that designers play a different kind of role socially. So I am curator and editor in Subjective Artist Editions, which is a publishing initiative based in the Netherlands and in Belgium, where we create bottom-up mapping international editorial projects. And I was also curating an artist in residence last autumn in the eldership of Garliava neighborhoods, where we did a project with communities. And I was also the initiator, editor, curator, and executive producer of the Subjective Arts of Colombia between 2013 and 16. To tell you a little bit about myself, this is more or less my life in maps. I was born in Bogotá, Colombia. When I was about 16, 17 years old, I moved to Madrid. And I also became a Spanish citizen. Shortly after, I moved to New York, and then I was recruited by an English media agency, and I was doing international country reports all over the world, working for media like Forbes and Fortune and Newsweek, and interviewing government officials and CEOs of different corporations, so on and so forth. And that experience brought me to Mongolia, to Athens, to Equatorial Guinea, to Lisbon, and I also did a project with Amsterdam in Madrid. And ultimately, that's when my kind of love affair started with design. I decided to change careers, move to Holland, and start practice as a designer. I enrolled in the Rietveld Academy, which is actually a beautiful modernist building. And shortly, well, actually, upon arrival in Holland, I met Annelies de Wet, who is a Dutch designer. And she has been a teacher for many years in different academies. She was director of the Man and Communication Department of the Design Academy in Eindhoven. And later on, she became the head of the Design Masters at the Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, which is the Masters of the Rietveld Academy. And when I met Annelies, I came across this publication that she made called The Public Role of the Graphic Designer, and in which she explored the discourse around design in relation with politics and society. So I'm going to read this quote. The same way media influences our collective moral, design has become part of our collective memory. It helps determine the manner in which a society as a whole expresses itself. And then she posed these questions to her students when she was making this publication. So, can you design images that have a constructive effect on society's perceptions? Can design be critical and sustainable and at the same time optimistic? And does a designer have responsibility to do so? And these are some images of the exercises that came out in this publication. So they actually intervened a series of public structures in the city, and they created these prints, and they created a whole discourse about integration, which was a hot topic at the time in Holland. Geert Wilders, this populist politician, has just come into the picture. And so she also did this publication as a way to subvert his discourse. So concluding, and this is the way I like to look at design, or how I think designers should be or are, or how I think my practice fits in. I think designers have a defined social, political, economical, and cultural position. I think designers are initiators and authors of their projects, of artistic concepts, and of visual strategies. And we do that by applying processes that are circular, that are integral, responsible, and philosophical. So in the process of finding your own voice as a designer, then the identity aspect comes in. And so when I went to find into my own identity, I created this graphic, which is a superimposition of all the maps that you saw in the first slide. So, you know, I like to think that my identity is somehow confused between all these countries that I lived in. You know, and emotionally I feel connected to Colombia, but my mind or my political, social spheres were connected to Spain, and then I have lived so long in the Netherlands, but actually I think all this traveling was also kind of my education somehow. So I created this for an article that was published, and I call this, in Colombia everyone sees what one wants to see. And this comes a bit from this notion that you know, you can interpret the reality around you in your own way, and you kind of don't look at what you don't want to look, and you look at what you want. So, you know, thinking about identity and English representation, this is sort of, well, kind of obvious images that you come across when you think about Colombia. So this is the kind of bad and ugly. So we have the, you know, FARC and guerrillas, we have the trafficking and cocaine production, we have violence and displacement and poverty, drug lords, or you also have the very mainstream aspect, you know, like beauty pageants and Shakiras and Malumas and soccer games. Or you also have the very kind of utopia perfection that the tourism board wants to present about Colombia, which is, you know, this beautiful couple in this double bicycle riding through empty streets in Cartagena. They don't exist, I tell you. It never looks like that, but you know, they present this as magic realism. Colombia, come here, is beautiful, tropical, amazing. So, you know, how to question this apparent objectivity. So now I'm going to introduce the Subjective Atlas series, which is a response to these media discourses. The series is quite extensive. We have now published all of these, and about 5 more actually are in the making. I would have liked to bring a bigger stack of publications, and later on when we are in discussion, we can also browse the publications. I brought here with me 3. And you know, to get into that, I would like to, you know, kind of go back to the very root of the matter, which is, you know, what is a map? So maps are coded compact representations of reality. And coding means, you know, classifying and simplifying a lot of layers of information, and therefore choices that are made when you make a map are always political decisions that you take. So maps are actually never neutral. And so why do we like to use subjectivity to cartograph things? I'd like to go a little bit back in time to introduce the fact that historically, you know, maps have always been serving the purposes of kind of top power agendas. It was very nice to see this small atlas you brought, for example, where, you know, because it was published by the Soviet Union, it's very clear the Soviet Union was at the center of all the maps. So when you start browsing the atlas, the first thing you see is Russia in the center, and then everything around it. And this is another kind of very basic and classic example. So back in the Berlin conference time, all these gentlemen were in this nice posh room, and they were taking decisions upon Africa there. And so they decided more or less to do this with Africa. Very arbitrary lines were drawn into the continent. You know, they just decided, okay, now this is for you, this is for me, this is for the English, this is for the Portuguese, this is for the French. But the actual reality of Africa and its map is actually like this. So it consists of all these micro tribes and small populations, you know, that it doesn't refer at all with the actual political map. So that's what we call a top-down map. And what we like to do is a bottom-up one. So to make a bottom-up map, you have to go back to the human perspective, and then you make local people the authors of the maps. And then in that process, what happens is that every personal story becomes important and relevant and special and interesting. Because the specificities and the differences of each culture and society lay in these very small but meaningful details. And here we like to coin a term which is geopoetry. We like to think that mapping can also be done in a very poetical way, as it deals with personal subjectivity. And so this is, I'm going to show you a few images of the processes. In this case I focused, the series is quite extensive, and of course I could go on showing you examples and examples and images, but I'm going to try to focus on Colombia, which is the project I directed. And then I will show you some about the experience here in Lithuania. So this was the workshop we did in Colombia. This is in the Caribbean area of Colombia. We gathered about 15 participants here, all designers, photographers, architects, artists. Hands-on work. And then the publication came in. So the way we structure these publications usually is that the beginning of the publications display a top-down way of looking at the territory, so maps, but then subjective. And then from there we start looking at the space, the territory, the surroundings, the landscape, how do you first perceive the reality around you. These are some architectonical details that were collected by Japanese and a Swedish couple of architects who did a residency in Bogota. And they found, very special that there were all these typologies that are almost intuitive in the architecture, or like, these stories that are kind of added on top and on top and on top. Or sometimes, it's like the public space, the private space gets completely into the public space with no boundaries. These are, for example, typologies of kitchens in the city of Medellin, drawn by an illustrator. And here, the artist focused on how different kitchens can be according to different social stratas or classes. This is an image of the workshop we held recently in Uraque and then in Gakimus. And we also had a workshop in Fortas 3, but unfortunately I have the picture in my hard drive in Rotterdam, so not included. And this is the publication that we are about to print, actually. So these are maps of the Gariaba editorship. Subjective ones. These are panoramic views of the territory, according to different cardinal points and according to the experience of the inhabitant. This is a funny, beautiful story. So this highway is actually right next to that pond, and from if you're standing up there, and you overlook through the fence, you see the pond. And there's this kind of local small myth that this lake is in the shape of a heart. It's subjective.
One heart.
So therefore, we call this love from above the highway. These are the trees surrounding a 100-meter radius from the house of someone living in the Kaune. These are fences that divide the public and private space in those areas. These are gardening tools collected by someone there. These are treasures found in Fortas 3 through explorations, excavations, and so on and so forth. These are flowers made with petals, orange peel, bronze wire, plastic net, feather, cardboard boxes. These are local women dressed in folk dresses that they hand embroider, and they also have a choir. This is the house of a couple that was updated after having been bought from the government. So it was very compartmented, and now after actually the owner himself did all the whole renovation of his house, and they turned down walls, which is what we try to, exemplify with this graphic intervention. So what used to be a very compartmented space actually now creates a whole different relationship for the inhabitants, because it features an open plan space where they can relate in a different way to their own home. And this is an infographic about how the daily routine of someone who used to be a worker for the TV and radio tower of Jürgen has mutated through the years. So now he's pensionate, and his life has completely changed in his habits and the activities he does. So if you examine the infographic with attention, then you will find how his life has changed so much from in 3 cycles, so from 79 to 95, 95 to 2000, 2000 till now. We also did comparisons of objects of what used to be Lithuanian reality back in the 80s. She was born in 82, so she used all of these objects back when she was a teenager, maybe. And these are the equivalents of what she uses nowadays. And this is more like local artistry, I would call it. He uses local wood, and then he creates this kind of imaginary micro landscapes with resins and different color pigments and etc. But there's so much also poetry in the titles and the kind of miniature meanings inside the subjects. And this is our group of people. We had anything from an 84-year-old woman to a 2-year-old baby, and everything in between. So how do we do these projects? Usually we get an invitation by a cultural institute somewhere in the world, and then we form this team of a curator producer, an editor designer, and subjective arts editions. We then figure out the logistics, finances, etc. And then we create the workshops. We invite all these artists, and then we start doing the research directly in personal connection with all these people. We collect and visualize all this material and put it together in a design file, and then that design file goes into a round of feedback, production, translation, proofreading, etc. until it is ready to be printed, and then it can be distributed. And then we spread it and we share the content. Oh, sorry, I was supposed to do this like this so you could follow the infographic a bit further up. I'll run through it a bit. So we don't like to think that this is a design project. We like to think that this is more of a strategy. We don't think that we only publish books. The whole point of this project is not to make a book. It's actually to use it as a tool. We like to think that our publications are not exclusive but inclusive. That's why they feature this humble format. That's why they are not expensive. All the content is further distributed as open source, so we use a Creative Commons license instead of a copyright, so that everyone has access to the material. You can download the PDFs online, and then by doing all these exercises, we step into a further discussion between personal reality and political reality. So these are examples of how the material has been appropriated elsewhere. So for example, when the Subjective Atlas of Palestine was published, they later on used the subjective flags that were in the content to make a poster. for a lecture at the University of North Carolina. But it was also some documents that were presented in the collections and were later on the cover of a magazine about Palestine in Holland. The subject of Palestine was really appreciated by the president of Palestine, so he decided to actually sponsor a whole translation of the publication in Arabic to have as a relational gift, so he could distribute a different image of Palestine. Further on, we also organize now something called Subjective Evenings, which is a sort of podium where we invite people to talk, discuss, interact, present their points of view, panel discussions. We also do exhibitions. This is the exhibition I curated in Colombia about the subjective atlas of Colombia. And I like to think that it was kind of a contemporary version of a cabinet of curiosities where all the content was, that's why I on purpose put all these content so together so that every intervention would kind of interact with each other. There was also kind of live artwork where you could modify the Colombian anthem as long as you would respect the rhyme in the lyrics. This is the exhibition we had recently in the TV tower of Uruguay. So, as I said at the beginning, I did not talk so much about modernism. What I wanted more with this was to present, a concept and a method. But I would still like, to put these reflections. Maybe these are, questions or thoughts that we can later discuss during the roundtable discussion. So, what makes Kaunas modernistic heritage unique, if there's such thing, and is that still relevant or is that still important nowadays? Reading some material, I found out that Kaunas modernism was heavily influenced by foreign education, by foreign architectonical styles, by foreign influences. So, what I like to think is also, is it possible, to think about modernism or modernistic heritage by focusing specifically in the personal experience and in the people that actually inhabit these structures? And wouldn't that be actually a very good mechanism to create a sense of belonging, awareness, and relevance to these places? So this is more of a reflection. I think a possible approach would be to reflect on the past and then subjectively map the present, and then visualize modernism for the future. And to conclude, I just want to share this quote that I really like, which is that maps don't represent reality, but they actually create reality.